society in Scotland that laid the foundations for the Scottish Parliament as we know it today. A hard-won Parliament that, let's not forget, was a huge step forward. Leadership in this time of almost perma-crisis must come from the politicians, yes. It must come from the government, and it will. But it also must come from each and every one of you in this room. The Scottish Parliament, at its best, offers a different way of governing. Consensus, not as the lowest common denominator, but reflecting the reality that we always travel furthest when we travel together. And I know that from working with him, that John Swinney is a unifier. He is a man who cares deeply about the future of this country that we call home. He's a man with the leadership skills for this moment in time. And it is with great pleasure that I now invite him to address us at the beginning of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming, and I wish everyone a very happy New Year. I hope you had the opportunity, as I did over the last couple of weeks, to spend some peaceful time with family and with friends. Many people, of course, sacrifice some of that precious time in order to keep Lifeline services running over the holiday period. So the very first thing I want to do today is to place on record my sincere thanks to frontline workers and to their families for the sacrifices that they made over the holiday period. The beginning of January is always an opportunity for reflection. We remember the highs and the lows of the year just ended. Hopefully, we're able to appreciate the many things in our own lives for which we can be grateful, but perhaps pass us by in the bustle of the 21st century. But we also look forward to the year ahead and to consider how we can learn and how we can grow. And what is true for us as individuals is also true for us as a nation. And as First Minister, I'm fully focused on ensuring that we grasp the opportunities and confront head-on the barriers facing Scotland. This morning, I want to share with you some of my hopes and ambitions for Scotland in the next 12 months. What is already clear is that, sadly, 2025 will see many of the challenges facing the world that it did in 2024. Be that war in Europe and in the Middle East, the accelerating threat of climate change, the rise of populism, and global institutions challenged in a way that none of us would have anticipated even a decade ago. I've described this combination of challenges and their impact on people's day-to-day lives as a long, dark economic winter. But of course, no winter lasts forever. In this land that's used to many a long, cold winter night, it should not surprise us that many of our New Year traditions involve fire. The light and the warmth not only ward off the darkness of the winter, but they herald the return of the sun. They herald also the coming of the spring. Longer, brighter days may still be a distance away, but they are coming, of that I have no doubt. It is why I look forward today with a degree of hope to the future. I say a degree of hope because I know that for many of us, challenges remain acute. The lingering effects of austerity, inflation, the pandemic, and the economic fallout of Brexit continue to cast shadows. Shadows over tight family finances and over, under pressure, public services. But I am hopeful because despite the difficulties, Scotland's economy has shown much resilience with low unemployment rates and strong job growth. But we must be in no doubt that growth remains too low and quality of life and living standards are not good enough for far too many people. Right now, I know many will be worrying not only about the financial challenges that they face, from the cost of Christmas and energy bills rising again this month, rents and mortgages, food and fuel costs. Since I became First Minister in May of last year, I spent a great deal of my time out and about, meeting people and listening to people. I've heard both their fears and their hopes, and also their realism. People know that when we've collectively experienced an unprecedented series of shocks as individuals, as communities and as a nation, in response, some will pretend there are easy answers. They will offer soundbite solutions. But if we're going to recover and renew as a nation, then we have to come together as a nation. We have to be willing to put in the hard yards. And as Scotland's First Minister, I offer the leadership to do just that, to bring people together and to put in the hard graft to deliver real solutions for Scotland. I'm not going to sugarcoat our reality, but there is one thing I believe with absolute confidence. There is nothing wrong in Scotland that can't be fixed by what is right in Scotland. Yes, we've had a tough few years, but we've got what it takes to build our nation and transform our prospects step by step if we are willing to put our collective shoulder to the wheel. Over the past few months, we've been listening and we've been hearing. We understand the reality of what people are facing. That's why my government's programme is so firmly focused on the issues that matter to people in Scotland today. Boosting economic growth to create new job opportunities and to enable us to invest in our future. Eradicating child poverty and making sure the next generation have the very best opportunities. Ensuring Scotland capitalises on the new greener technologies, leaving nobody behind as our economy changes. Improving public services, especially our National Health Service, to meet the changing needs of a modern nation. We know what needs to be done to make progress for Scotland. And we took a massive step forward in delivering that progress with the budget published last month. It was a foundation, a platform on which to build a Scotland fit not just for the coming year, but for the coming decades. It's a budget that marks a turning point. With this budget, I want the people of Scotland to hear loud and clear my twin commitment to delivery and to hope. Delivery in the present, hope for the future. That includes delivery on sharing the wealth of our nation more fairly. Some argue that investment in social security is the wrong choice for us to make. But we know that inequality is bad for our health, bad for our communities, and bad for our economy. Our decision to invest in Scotland's social security safety net, with £1.3 billion extra directed towards the very poorest in our society, reflects the values that I think are fundamental to who we are as a nation. We do not walk by on the other side of the street. Instead, as much as we can, we extend a helping hand. All the more, for there's still too many children in our land living in poverty. We're one of the richest, most blessed nations on the planet, and it's a scandal that 1 in 4 children still live in poverty. Children who are part of our collective future, essential to our future success. Children whose potential should be nourished, not stifled. Eradicating child poverty is my top priority because I do not wish to condemn any young Scot to a life of disadvantage simply because of where they were born. And while it's morally the right thing to do, it's also in Scotland's economic interests. For we will never reach our full potential as a country unless every one of our citizens grows up to reach their own individual potential. Think of the vast sums of money rightly spent tackling the symptoms of poverty such as crime and ill health. Think of the economic growth and innovation we've forfeited for decades because poverty leads to lower achievement at school. Tackling poverty is an investment in our economic prosperity. That's why we made the choices we did in this budget, on the cruel 2-child cap, on more affordable homes, on breakfast clubs, on additional support needs, and on investment in regeneration and economic growth. And have no doubt, the direct investment that we have chosen to make to tackle poverty contributes, in its own right, to a stronger economy, providing a boost to Scotland's GDP in the short term of as much as £330 million. It is investment in our people and investment also in the wealth of our land. And delivery also on revitalised public services fit for the challenges of this new age, none more so than the National Health Service. The NHS has served us well for 80 years, but it's been left bruised by an unprecedented series of shocks. Its fundamental strengths remain, but its weaknesses have been exposed. Quite simply, the NHS must be renewed if it is once again to thrive. Now, we've made the choice to deliver record funding for health and social care because after 14 years of austerity, investment now is essential if our health service is to turn the corner. The issue is not the quality of our NHS, but access to the NHS and the world-class healthcare provided by its staff. Too many people wait too long for that first diagnosis. They have problems accessing their GP or accident and emergency, and waiting times for some remain unacceptably long. We understand the problem and we have a solution. And if the budget passes, we will deliver the money that we need to deliver that solution. It's a solution that delivers more operations, new hospitals, easier access to your GP, and more dental trainees. For all of this, the NHS needs this budget to pass. That's what I mean when I talk about delivery and hope. On energy, Scotland has unrivalled potential in technology and innovation. The actions we take today will determine the extent to which we maximise the economic and social impact of this opportunity in the future. Scotland is an energy-rich nation, but my ambition is for Scots to also become energy-rich people, with our energy wealth delivering more jobs, new economic opportunities, real community benefit, and lower energy bills. Our budget delivers additional money to support the expansion of our offshore wind capacity and to enable the creation of a Scottish-based manufacturing supply chain, money to deliver a green reindustrialisation of our economy. It contains investment in technologies of the future, from robotics to AI, as well as funding for Scotland's world-leading Tech Scaler initiative to help small, innovative companies to grow and to thrive. All of it is essential to deliver growth in our economy. And for that to happen, the Scottish budget has to pass. It is the first major step to ensuring that 2025 is a year of improvement and progress for Scotland. That's what I mean when I talk about delivery and hope. There is, of course, an alternative prospect for 2025, and that is one in which MSPs do not pass the budget. And given that the government does not command a parliamentary majority, it's a scenario that we all have to contemplate. It's important for me to set out the consequences of that outcome. The architects of devolution made sure the reality of any failure by Parliament to pass a budget was pretty straightforward. Their intention was to avoid a US-style government shutdown. The impact, however, of a budget failing to pass is severe, and I need everyone to be aware of the damage that will be done if that were to happen. If the budget fails to pass, the prospect of progress in tackling the issues this country urgently needs to address will be lost. For example, without a tax resolution passed by the Scottish Parliament or a UK Government Treasury order in the House of Commons, at least £1.7 billion of tax revenues could disappear, money that's already built into the budgets of our hospitals, GPs, police service, transport system and schools. And even if Parliament resolves the tax issue, without a Budget Act, emergency arrangements come into effect. These are strict and have severe consequences. First of all, it means money can only be legally spent for purposes already agreed in the previous year's budget. That means we cannot spend a single penny on a purpose that does not appear in the 2024-25 budget. Even more restricting is the fact that spending is limited to individual calendar months. Each portfolio cannot spend more than the larger of 1/12 of any amount authorised in the previous year's budget, or the amount actually spent for that purpose in the same calendar month of the previous year. And what does that mean? Well, as an example, it might mean that we cannot spend any more money on health and social care in April 2025 than we did in April 2024. Think about what that might mean for pay. If the pay rate is higher next year, and it's contractually meant to be, but the budget is frozen every month, how can pay increases be met? Think about what it might mean for paying the bills. If the electricity or gas bill in a public building rises next year, and we know it's going to, how can the lights be kept on when the budget is frozen every month? If party politicking results in the budget failing to pass, there will be real damage done. Ministers across government would, of course, have to assess options and consider mitigations, and ministers will always seek to avoid the worst impact. But let's look at what might become a reality. It would put at risk £2 billion of additional investment in the NHS, causing a catastrophic reduction in service delivery. Operations would likely have to be cancelled. Nurses and doctors' pay rises would be under threat. Medicines might have to be rationed. It could mean no universal winter heating payments for pensioners. The record increase in arts and culture funding halted. Fewer teachers and no new money for additional support needs. Increased funding for affordable housing lost. Real damage to the very fabric of our public services. Real damage inflicted on some of the most vulnerable in our land. Now, for the good of Scotland, I want to make sure that none of this comes to pass, which is why my government and I have done and are doing the work to avoid this disastrous scenario. And I remain confident that we can secure the passage of the budget. Why? Because we've brought forward a budget that is set in the mainstream of Scottish public opinion. Measures to protect business from a challenging trading environment. A real terms increase in local government funding to better support local services. Investment to reform and improve the National Health Service. A significant boost to housing investment and capital projects that will stimulate growth. Further steps to eradicate child poverty and create the best foundations for our next generation. Investment in the clean, green opportunities of a just transition. My ministers have engaged in discussions with other political parties and many stakeholders, and have set out a budget designed to weave our priorities together with those we have heard from other parties and from stakeholders into a cohesive and a unifying programme that works for all of Scotland. We've tried to bring political parties together, and we stand ready to do more to complete the task. So my invitation to all of you today is to join with us, businesses, third sector organisations, think tanks, universities, unions. I'd like to invite all of you in this room to play your part in helping to secure the passage of the budget. Because the NHS needs this budget to pass. Our economy needs this budget to pass. Scotland needs this budget to pass. I say that not because the budget gives any one group or party or individual everything they want, but because it's a budget that delivers progress. A budget that will enable us to bring renewal to our public services and to make the most of our country's many opportunities, whether in energy or in the arts. I want to do what is best for Scotland. We all do. And that's why I care so much about getting it right for our National Health Service, getting it right for the most vulnerable in our community, getting it right for our future economic success. I began today by reflecting on the experience of so many of our citizens as they enter this new year. They do not have the luxury of posturing when faced with the day-to-day struggles of making ends meet. They have to make their budgets work. They have to get on with the reality of life as they find it. And they will be unforgiving of any politicians who would rather play political games. If we're to meet the challenge of this age, we have to make sure that our politics work for the people we serve. And that means ultimately doing the hard work that ensures Scotland has a budget. If the budget falls, the impact will not be felt primarily directly by the MSPs who choose to vote no. It will be felt by the people in this room and the people you serve. Voters will rightly struggle to understand why politicians, despite being in agreement with probably more than 95% of the budget's contents, choose to block it from passing to prove some nebulous and ultimately, as I've set out today, highly damaging political point. We don't have to look far beyond Scotland's shores to see what happens when politicians and political parties pursue stalemates instead of progress. So be in no doubt, if people do not see Scotland's Parliament delivering progress for Scotland's people, if instead it embarks down a path of political posturing and intransigence, then we run a real risk of feeding the forces of anti-politics and of populism. And that is not something that I am prepared to countenance in Scotland, because in that circumstance, nobody wins. My ask of you today, therefore, is a simple one. Make your voices heard. The better days we crave won't just happen. We either add to Scotland's problems or we choose to be part of the solution. Thwarting a budget may make some politicians feel good, but it will be at the expense of Scotland's NHS. It will be at the expense of Scotland's pensioners. It will keep more children in poverty. It will be a wrecking political ball when what Scotland needs is recovery. It's as simple as that. So, friends, in these opening days of 2025, let us resolve that it be a year of progress for Scotland. The first step is for Parliament to come together and to pass a budget that enables us to get on with delivering. So let's choose progress. Let's choose renewal. At the start of 2025, let's choose hope. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do, first of all, is take some questions from the broadcast media. I'll speak to the print media later on, more informally, and then we'll take some questions from guests who are in the room with us today. So the first question I'm going to come to is Glenn Campbell from BBC Scotland.
Thank you, First Minister. You've talked about the forces of anti-politics and populism. Who are these forces, and if they include Elon Musk, how big a threat do you think he poses to democracy in Scotland and the UK?
I think the forces of populism are pretty well advertised around our country today. I think we can see them all visibly contributing to the debate. The choice that I'm putting to people today is that we don't have to feel obliged to fuel that populism. We can act in a way that delivers through our political system for the needs of the public, delivering the investment that comes from the budget and the passing of the budget, which heralds the investment into our health service, into boosting our economy and tackling child poverty, and ensuring that we can invest in the just transition to net zero. So there's a choice for all of us in addressing the question that you put to me, Glenn, which is about whether we act to fuel that sense of the political system not delivering for people, or we can fuel the political system by passing a budget to demonstrate the political system can deliver for people in Scotland by delivering the improvements and the opportunities that lie at the heart of the contents of the budget. And that's very much the political debate that we will take forward in the weeks that lie ahead. I'll now come to Laura Alderman of STV.
Specifying who you're talking about.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious who the populists are. We hear from them on a daily basis. But my point is that we have to focus on using the political system to deliver for the people of our country and to deliver on their expectations. And that's what our budget does. And that's why I want to make sure it's successful when Parliament votes on that question in February. Right, we'll come to Laura Alderman now of STV.
Thank you, First Minister. Given that he called your predecessor a racist, how are you planning on dealing with Elon Musk when he's about to become a member of the Trump administration in just a few weeks' time? And do you think that Prime Minister Keir Starmer is being tough enough on him?
I think it's important that we all take the actions that we can to address the issues that members of the public are concerned about. That's what's the whole theme of my speech today is about the importance of addressing the issues that are relevant in people's lives today and to provide the solutions. And those solutions are not always straightforward, and they're certainly not as glib as populists like Elon Musk would suggest they are. And what we've got to do is to work hard, bring people together in a sense of unified purpose to make sure that we improve the lives of people in Scotland as a consequence of our actions. And the first step for doing that in Scotland in 2025 will be about the passing of the budget. If the budget doesn't pass, then I think we're playing right into the hands of Elon Musk and to other populists. I think we're playing right into their hands because we're demonstrating, or the political system is demonstrating, that it can't address people's day-to-day concerns. And our budget, we've listened, my Finance Secretary, Shona Robertson, Ivan McKee, the Public Finance Minister, have spent a huge amount of time engaging with a variety of opinions in Scotland at my request to produce what I would characterise as a unifying budget, a budget that brings Scotland together. And that, to me, is the best way of delivering the response to populists, because that's the solution to the challenges that people face, and we can deliver that and demonstrate the political system is working at its best in the process, and that's the approach that we intend to take. Kieran Andrews from ITV Border.
Thank you, First Minister. You've talked a lot about improving household income in people's lives, but council tax is expected to rocket this year. In the Borders alone, they're talking about increases of up to 10%. Councils say that's because of years of underfunding, even if this budget paints a better picture. So aren't people about to get tax rises and suffer lost their income through the back door because your Holyrood administration has been doing for years to councils what you've accused Westminster of doing to Holyrood and underfunding it?
Well, when the Scottish Government has put in place a council tax freeze, for example, we have fully compensated local authorities for the loss of income that they would have suffered as a consequence. Now, we've listened carefully to local government, and I think, and you highlighted this in your question, Kieran, that local government has responded very positively to the budget settlement that's been put forward by the Scottish Government, and I really welcome that, because that's a tangible example of how the government has acted to try to bring people together, how we've acted to try to create greater cohesion and unity within Scotland. And I think some of the numbers that have been talked about in local government are numbers that were talked about before the contents of the budget were known. So the individual local authorities will have received the specific funding arrangements that will be coming to them in the Local Government Finance Circular, which issued about a week or so after the budget before Christmas, and they'll be considering the implications of those. And I certainly would want to see council tax increases, if there are to be rises, to be as low as possible. I accept there is a need for us to invest in public services. That's been, you followed me through the election campaign, Kieran. You heard me making the plea for there to be investment in our public finances and public services because of the desperate requirement for that to be the case. The Scottish Government has provided for that in the budget. We've provided for that with a real terms increase in core budgets for local authorities and a £1 billion increase in local authority funding when you take everything together within the budget. So I hope what that creates is an ability for local government to consider carefully, in the context of the cost of living pressures that we all know people are wrestling with, to keep any increases in the council tax to as low a level as possible. James Cook from BBC News.
Happy New Year to you, First Minister. I want to come back to Elon Musk, and perhaps I can explain why we're asking about him, because, you know, this isn't just some random business person. This is the richest person in the world, a close advisor to the US president, as you know, someone who's going to have an actual role in the next US government, and one of the world's most powerful publishers. So with all that in mind, when you hear Elon Musk use that megaphone he has to directly involve himself in Scottish and UK politics, how much of a danger to our politics do you think he poses?
What we've got to do in all of these, and Happy New Year to you, James, as well, what we've got to do in these circumstances is we've got to use the tools available to us. We're not powerless. All of what you said is true in characterising Elon Musk and the influence and the power that he can express. But it's up to the rest of us to decide what our response is going to be to that. And we're not powerless. We've got a parliament that's sitting just down the road, or it will be tomorrow. And that parliament's got the ability to decisively and emphatically back a unifying provision in the budget from the Scottish Government, which is about improving the lives of people in Scotland. And that would make a sizable impact in Scotland in responding to the very issues that you put to me, because people would see a difference in their lives as a consequence. I accept that people are feeling frustrated and angry with the current set of circumstances. I've taught, you've probably been at all of the major speeches I've delivered where I've reflected on the conditions and the pressures that people are facing as a consequence of the financial crash. The Deputy First Minister set out the whole sequence: the financial crash, Brexit, COVID, austerity, the invasion of Ukraine, the spike in energy prices. All of this has had a real effect on the living standards of individuals. I happen to believe the most negative impact on living standards in Scotland has been as a consequence of the folly of Brexit. It's done untold damage. That damage is now being clearly seen by people. So we've got to have a response, and our response, to me, is to take the actions that we can take to improve people's lives and to give them confidence in our political system. And the best way we can do that in the short term, in the course of the first 2 months of 2025, is to pass the Scottish Government's budget, which has been constructed quite deliberately to bring people together in Scotland. That was the direction I gave to the Finance Secretary about the composition of the budget. It had to bring people together, and I think it's succeeded in doing that. It just needs to get the last bit of the jigsaw put together, which is bring Parliament together. And that's what my plea is about today. Well, it's all about how we respond to that, James, is my point. And how we respond to it is by taking actions as elected politicians to make a difference in people's lives. So we've got a choice in the Scottish Parliament. I've rehearsed, that's why I've set out what I've set out to you all today. If we pass a budget, which is a unifying budget, which is addressing the real needs and concerns of people within Scotland, I think we will help to give people greater confidence in our political system, which is an antidote to the forces of populism that you've talked about. If we don't do that, then I'm warning that we risk fueling that sentiment, and that will be very dangerous for our democratic traditions in Scotland. I'll now come to Catherine Sampson from Channel 4. Catherine.
Thank you. I'm going to try this question more directly. Do you believe Elon Musk might attempt to influence next year's Holyrood vote as a test run for the next general election? And if so, what specifically do you plan to do about it? And since everyone's doing a few questions today, can I also say, as you talk about making progress, how does it feel to enter yet another year without a conclusion to Operation Branch Form?
On the last point, I'm not going to comment on live investigations. That's not a good idea for the First Minister. In relation to the first part of your question, Catherine, I think the honest answer is I don't know what Elon Musk will try to do. Just for clarity, I don't have a direct line. And I'm not seeking a direct line, just in case anyone's asking if that's the follow-up question. So I don't know is the honest answer to the question. But what I do know is that our electoral law and our whole approach to our politics is based on the fact that there should be no external interference. And I don't like external interference in Scottish politics, whether it comes from London or the United States or anywhere else, or Russia or wherever else. I believe that the politics of our country should be determined by the people who choose to live in this country from wherever they've come from. If they choose to make this country their home, then they're entitled to shape its future. That's the absolute foundation of my politics, and I don't want to see external influence in that process. Now, the last broadcast question I'm going to come to is Tony Maguire from GB News. Tony.
Good morning, First Minister. I just wanted to ask how the Scottish Government is handling the transition of the agricultural and rural economy portfolio now that that has been folded into the block grant from Westminster. Well, the first thing we've done, Tony, is we've ring-fenced the funding available for agriculture that came through the block grant, so that constancy is available to the agricultural sector. There are, of course, risks in relation to future settlements because the level of support that's available in that respect is a product of decisions made in the United Kingdom government about their support for agricultural policy. If that was to diminish, then that could have an effect on the overall composition of our block grant. But we've taken a decision to ring-fence that funding, and that will be available. The second thing that we've done is that we have committed in the budget, and this is another reason why the budget should be supported, we've committed to investing some of the resources that were requested by the agricultural industry in future capital projects, in the resources that we had previously utilised to balance prior year budgets. So the agricultural sector will have access to increased resources for investment purposes in the next financial year should the budget pass. So that's another reason why it's vital that we get the parliamentary agreement to the budget so that we can address the issues of long-term stability for the agricultural sector. Now, of course, one of my aspirations is to be able to give a longer line of sight about agricultural funding in the years to come. Agriculture previously had that under the Common Agricultural Policy, the much maligned Common Agricultural Policy. There was 7 years line of sight about financial support for farming. Now, we only have budget numbers for the next financial year. In the spring, we expect to get 3 years' worth of numbers from the UK government, and that will allow us to give a better line of sight, because agriculture is one of these industries where you need to have a good long-term perspective to support investment, and I want to make sure we have those conditions so that we have a thriving agricultural sector, which contributes significantly, of course, to some of our major export products, whether that's whisky or whether it's food and drink exports to Europe and further afield. But we will do as much as we can to provide that stability. Okay, that brings to an end the broadcast media questions. I'm very happy to take some questions from the floor. If there, yes, I'll take the lady at the front here, first of all, and there's a microphone just there.
First Minister Alison Watson, Shelter Scotland. On behalf of all of us at Shelter Scotland, a very happy new year to you. Really welcome the emphasis in your speech on delivery and on hope. In particular, Shelter Scotland, as you know, really warmly welcomes that reversal of last year's savage cut to the housing budget. You're hoping that this budget marks a turning point, and we indeed hope that that reversal of the housing cut is a step change in the way that the government is tackling Scotland's housing emergency. I wholeheartedly support making child poverty and tackling child poverty a top priority. And with that in mind, would you agree that the housing budget really needs to target the record-breaking 10,110 children who are currently stuck in temporary accommodation without a permanent home? And to do that, that reversal in the housing budget, we think, needs to prioritise social housing, because all the data suggests that that's where those children need to move on to. And I'd really welcome your comments on that.
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, Alison, and thank you for your comments, because I do
welcome the comments you've made about the strength of the budget. But the budget is a headline number, £768 million on housing. The question you pose gets into, well, what's going to be done within that £768 million? And I think it's a really strong, it's a very important question. And I am very sympathetic to the focus being on addressing the temporary accommodation issue. So if I give you one example, one of the pivots in housing policy that's been made since I came into office as First Minister is the government has become much more actively engaged in tackling the issue of void accommodation. Previously, that was an issue that we tended to leave very much to local authority decision-making. But what we are trying to do is to put more of our energy into working with local authorities and other organisations to tackle the issue of voids so that we can utilise some of those resources to make accommodation available to tackle exactly the temporary accommodation challenge that you have set out. So I think we've got to have a very open discussion. Shirley-Ann Somerville, the Cabinet Secretary, Paul McLennan, the Housing Minister, are both here today, and I'm sure it's something that can be pursued afterwards. But I'm very keen to make sure that we maximise the effectiveness of that £768 million budget to tackle exactly the issue that you are talking about. So there will be some actions we can take about voids. There are other actions we could take about acquisitions. There's other actions that we can take about new build. But to be quite blunt about it, a new build takes longer than solving a void in most cases. So therefore, if we want to address the temporary accommodation issue, then perhaps we need to rebalance the way in which we're undertaking that investment to reach that objective. So there'll be willing ears within government to try to do that. But again, I come back to my core point. If this settlement is welcome, we've got to make sure it passes Parliament so we can get on with the decisions to, I've got ministers who are now actively looking at how does that £768 million get deployed. I want them to be able to just take that to its natural conclusion with no interruption, such as a budget not managing to pass in late February. So I think your comment is a very helpful reminder of why this all matters. Thank you. I'll take the gentleman here in the just there.
Thank you, First Minister, and good morning. I'm Finlay Almond from Magic Breakfast. We welcome the commitment in the budget to extending school breakfast provision through Bright Start breakfasts that the Finance Secretary announced that will support children and young people at risk of being too hungry to learn. The commitment, however, doesn't go as far as the COVID recovery strategy, which you yourself laid before Parliament back in 2021, nor does it go as far as the UK Government's commitment in England in the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill to universal provision for all primary age pupils, which we expect to come in hopefully next year. Do you see Bright Start breakfasts as a first step for your government to meeting its manifesto commitments and previous government commitments, or do you see it as an end in itself?
I think, but before I come on to answer your question, Finlay, just to make one other comment I should have made in relation to Alison's point. Alison's point about housing is absolutely integral to the child poverty agenda. Absolutely integral. So it's not some compartment called housing. It's absolutely centre of the child poverty agenda, as is your question, Finlay, about the importance of making sure that we have as effective breakfast provision as we can. I see this as a start of our commitment of taking the steps we can take within our balanced programme. There's other measures we're taking, obviously, to tackle child poverty. The Scottish Child Payment, now sitting at nearly £27 a week for each eligible child. It's a huge contribution to family incomes. And that's one of the choices that we made to try to address child poverty in as impactful a way as we possibly could do. So there will be, there is more that can be done in this area, and I would characterise the investment that we've made in the budget as the start of the measures that we can take to expand the provision that we're making. In addition, of course, to the fact that we're working with local authority colleagues on free school meals for eligible pupils and
receipt of the Scottish Child Payment for P6 and 7, in addition to the universal provision that exists already for P1 to 5 pupils. Okay, I'll take the gentleman there, just behind the screen.
Bruce Cartwright, Institute Chartered Accountants of Scotland. First Minister, coming back to public sector and NHS, I was actually quite heartened by your statement about the NHS saying we have the solution, which is a very bold statement. But to be honest, what we kind of heard was the solution is more money. Surely it's more significant. So could you expand on what the solution there is, what reform is included, and maybe actually wider, what reform you anticipate in the wider public sector?
There is a need. I don't take the view that the answer to every public sector challenge is more money. I've never taken that view. Indeed, I've got a track record of delivering much better value from public finances and public services in my 10 years as Finance Secretary, which demonstrate the ability to do so. But if you have 14 years of austerity that undermines investment in public infrastructure, you will pay a price for that, and we are currently paying a price for that. So the public finances need to recognise the necessity for further investment, which is why the uplift in the budget is so crucial for the National Health Service, but it's not the only part of the solution. What we have to undertake is the type of reform to ensure that we have a health and social care system that operates cohesively right across the system. And where we're putting a great deal of our effort just now is about ensuring that people get the right care in the right place. So that's about early intervention. It's about ensuring that we do all that we can to minimise delayed discharges, that we have the maximum capacity within our community sector to support the delivery of social care. Because one of the challenges that exists within the health system is the fact that often patients cannot be discharged from hospital safely into their own home without additional support, and that takes resources and capacity to put that in place. So the combination of what the government is putting in place in relation to the health service, what we're putting in place in relation to local government financial support is all designed to expand that capacity within health and social care within the community. Second area of activity we need to concentrate on is about ensuring that we have improvements in the achievement of waiting times performance, because that contributes again to supporting our economy. If people are unable to work because they're waiting for a procedure, then the quicker we can get to those individuals, the quicker they can get back into the labour market. So therefore, the steps that we're taking to ensure that the focus on improving the throughput of the health service is significant. If we take, for example, the achievements that were made by the Golden Jubilee Hospital in the National Treatment Centre, we're expanding the scope and the scale of the National Treatment Centres to provide that greater capacity to ensure that more procedures can be undertaken. And we're seeing already in the data that the number of procedures are increasing, and the number of operations that are being able to be deployed is increasing over time. So these are all part of the steps that we are taking to make sure that the health system meets the needs of the public. In relation to the wider question of public service reform, a great deal of our effort is being conducted at two levels. The first is an individual portfolio level, where through the budget process we are challenging portfolios about maximising the value for money within individual actions that are being undertaken. So every portfolio has a responsibility and an obligation to challenge for value for money. And secondly, we are taking specific targeted interventions led by Ivan McKee as the Public Finance Minister to identify areas where there are efficiencies to be gained through the redesign of services or through the redeployment of organisational resource. And that's already opening up savings opportunities of in excess of £200 million per annum. And we're very much in the foothills of that work, because the whole purpose of having of the approach that we're taking in the budget is to maximise the effectiveness and the value of public expenditure, and that's going to be very much the focus of what we take forward in the period to come. Right, I better go further back in the room, because I'm not actually, I'll take the lady at the end of the row there, just so you, Chris, thanks.
Good morning, thank you. I'm Helen Marlowe from Hospice UK. We welcome the commitment in the budget that Scottish governments will align support for hospices with Agenda for Change, pay rises to allow hospices to pay their staff the same as NHS staff. However, the funding announced in the budget is insufficient to realise this commitment and fully cover these costs. Without further in-year recurrent funding, the funding gap that hospices face will rise. Will the First Minister provide assurance that Scottish Government will fully cover the costs that hospices are facing to match NHS pay for their staff, to allow them to continue to provide vital services for the people of Scotland and to continue to relieve pressure on the NHS?
I think there's another important element that I think needs to be added to your question, Helen. I'll come to answer your question in a moment. But it's to recognise, and I want to recognise as First Minister, the centrality of the role of hospices within our country and in the role that they provide for individuals and for families. So we cannot, I want to reassure you that I don't view hospices again as part of a system that is not in the mainstream of what are our priorities and our thinking. I want to assure you that I view hospices very much as part of the firmament of our society, and they have to be able to perform the functions that they are performing. Which brings me on to answering your question, which is about financial support. Now, we've put in place the arrangements to meet the Agenda for Change pay levels, and that's certainly been one of the points that I'd previously discussed with the hospices sector. But I think what the commitment I can give you today is that ministers will be very happy. I know there have been discussions already with the Health Secretary, but would be happy to have further discussions with the hospice sector about how we can consider any further assistance that we can make to ensure that we fulfil my first commitment of making sure you're very much part of the firmament of our society. And I suppose it gives me the opportunity to come back to a point that I made in my speech, which is that the government set out its budget, but we are willing to engage with others about further steps that will strengthen the budget. I'm not going to stand here and say that is absolutely perfect. There is no need for us to enhance any provision within the budget. There is always opportunities for us to consider other provisions. We take that forward with stakeholders, we take it forward with other political parties, and we're very happy to sustain that conversation. Okay, I'll take the gentleman up at the back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, First Minister. I'm Sabir Zazeh from Scottish Refugee Council. On behalf of everyone that Scotland has welcomed, I wish you a very happy New Year. You talked about the budget being right for the most vulnerable. So in the current context, we have people in the asylum system here in Scotland who are expected to survive on £1.60 a day in the current cost of living crisis. How will your budget support the most vulnerable, including those looking to seek sanctuary in Scotland? Thank you.
There will be, happy New Year to you, Sabir, and there will be, there are always going to be financial challenges facing government, and people who are involved in the asylum system are very much here as part of a system that's presided over by the United Kingdom government, and we have to be, we have to take care about what steps that we take, and that the ones that we take in this respect are the ones that can have a beneficial effect. I was pleased that within the budget we were able to provide the financial support that will enable the concessionary travel scheme to be extended to asylum seekers to try to provide some degree of mobility. That is an issue which has generated some controversy. I think it's a reasonable and elementary step to try to support people with vulnerability to be able to make a contribution in our society. And again, it's for me a strong reason why the budget should be supported to put it into effect. But so that's one measure that we will take. We talked earlier on about housing issues, so there are obviously other measures we are taking through the housing investments which are designed to support individuals who succeed in their asylum journey and to enable them to be settled in our society. And obviously our country has been enriched by the contribution that has been made by asylum seekers over many, many years. And in recent weeks, as you will appreciate, I've had a number of discussions with representatives of the community who feel particularly vulnerable in the context of current political debate. And it's important from this podium that it's expressed that asylum seekers are welcome in Scotland and will have all the support that we can possibly give to the community. Now, I'll perhaps take one last question. I'll just take the lady there who's just got her hand up, and then we'll call it a day at that. Thank you.
Hi, First Minister, and Happy New Year. Nullag Nua Shiv Galir. I'm Claire Daly from WWF Scotland. Question is specifically with regard to the agriculture budget, and I know that has been mentioned earlier. What is the Scottish Government going to do in terms of the funding and to enable farmers in Scotland to make the transition to a more nature-friendly farming and climate-friendly farming?
I think there's two different aspects to that, Claire. The first, and Happy New Year to you, Claire. The first is that in the basic payment system, we will be working with the farming community to essentially provide the sustainability for individual farm enterprises to manage that underlying transition that has got to be made and to encourage that through the basic farm payment system. The second point is the additional resources that are going into the agricultural sector in the one-off capital investment, which is designed primarily to address the issues that you are raising, of providing the resources within agriculture to help the industry to make that transition. And that, of course, is not just a one-year commitment. That is going to be spread over 2 years to ensure that there is additional capital investment available to support the sector to make that transition. So there are a number of sectors where we have particular challenges in relation to the transition to net zero. Obviously, we're undertaking extensive activity in energy. The transport sector has many challenges, which again we are making progress through the decarbonisation of our transport networks. But agriculture remains one of the others. And the resources that we're putting in place is a combination of our approach to the basic payment system plus the investment that has been made in the one-off capital funding is designed to address that point. Okay, look, can I thank everybody very much for being here this morning. There'll be some refreshments available at the back and plenty of opportunity for us to have some informal conversation with my ministerial colleagues, and I'm deeply grateful to everyone for your engagement today, and I look forward to further discussions of which we will have many in the course of 2025. Thank you very much.